History as we know it is merely a thin layer of paint on a massive, ancient, and dark wall. We trace the rise of empires, the invention of the wheel, the birth of writing, and the unfolding of modern consciousness. But there is a haunting gap in our narrative. 100,000 years of silence that bridge the distance between our biological origins and the first stone monuments. We look at the past exclusively through the lens of civilization, often forgetting that for the vast majority of our existence, we were not civilized at all. We were something else entirely, primordial beings carved by the relentless, freezing pressure of the Ice Age. For tens of thousands of years, anatomically modern humans walked this earth. They possessed our brains, our hands, our eyes, and our capacity for complex thought. They felt deep fear, profound love, and the biting, relentless chill of the winds. Yet, the archaeological record remains chillingly empty. There are no sprawling cities, no grand artifacts of gold, and no written chronicles to tell their story. There is only the cold wind of the glacial plains and the quiet echoes of their footprints. Imagine yourself walking through a world that has no name, governed by laws of survival that have long since vanished from human memory. We are peeling back the heavy layers of time to uncover the raw, unvarnished reality of this forgotten century. We are about to step into the long, stretching shadow of the prehistoric mind, where the silence speaks louder than any monument ever built. Survival was not a constant struggle. It was a profound, deeply ingrained rhythm. Every movement of the day was dictated by the turning of the seasons, the unpredictable migration of herds, and the fickle, often unforgiving temper of the landscape. They did not view nature as a mere resource to be conquered or tamed, but as a living, breathing entity to which they were intrinsically connected. In the heart of deep winter, the world narrowed down to the flickering warmth of the hearth and the shared, desperate heat of the group. Every tool they held, a meticulously sharpened stone, a delicate bone needle used for stitching furs, or a wooden spear, was a testament to a deep, intimate, and experiential knowledge of the physical world. It was a life of extreme efficiency where nothing was wasted, and everything carried a vital purpose. To see the world through their eyes, one must set aside the modern concept of ownership and permanence. They lived in a perpetual state of flux, moving through vast, untamed territories that no map could ever fully contain. This was a nomadic existence defined by communal reliance. When you track a predator across the frozen crust of the snow, you do not speak. You observe, you anticipate, and you become a part of the environment itself. Silence was not an absence of sound. It was a language of survival, a way to remain invisible to the dangers that lurked in the shadows of the Ice Age. Their lives were written not in ink, but in the landscape they traversed and the tools they left behind for us to find. Communication was never just about survival. It was about the transmission of meaning across time. While the physical evidence of their language has vanished, the cognitive leap they made remains etched in the artifacts they left behind. A stone tool was not merely a rock. It was a conceptualized object, designed with a specific intent in mind. To shape flint into a razor-sharp edge requires an abstract grasp of geometry, pressure, and material properties. This was the birth of the hidden code of humanity, the ability to hold an idea in the mind, translate it into the physical world, and share that knowledge with another. Imagine the first spoken words, not as complex sentences, but as guttural sounds imbued with shared experience. They were pointers, markers of territory, or warnings of danger. But more than that, they were likely the seeds of storytelling. As they sat in the dim light of the cave, they didn't just share food. They shared the memory of the hunt, the fear of the storm, and the wonder of the stars. This cognitive evolution was the true beginning of our species' ascent, the ability to abstract, to plan for a future that hadn't yet arrived, and to encode that information into symbols. These were the first lines of code that would eventually lead to the complexity of the modern world. They were not primitive in their thinking. They were simply operating on a different frequency of consciousness. As night descended over the primeval landscape, the hearth became the absolute center of human existence. Fire was more than just a tool for warmth or protection against the prowling predators in the dark. It was the sacred anchor of the social order. Gathered around the flickering, dancing flames, the group transcended the cold, physical reality of the Ice Age. This was the theater of the night, a sanctuary where the boundaries between the human and the wild became blurred. In these long, shadowed hours, the act of maintaining the fire, feeding it with dry wood, carefully shielding it from the biting wind, became a shared, almost religious duty. It was during these quiet, intense moments that the intangible bonds of the tribe were forged and tempered. The light of the fire cast long, distorted shadows on the cave walls, turning simple stone surfaces into a living, shifting gallery of their own collective psyche. These were not just idle hours. They were the birth of the ritualistic mind. The rhythmic crackling of the logs, the smell of charred wood, and the hypnotic sway of the orange glow provided a backdrop for the very first songs and stories. Here, they processed the triumphs and traumas of the day. Every shadow in the corner of the cave was assigned meaning. Every sound from the forest was interpreted as a voice or a spirit. By controlling the flame, they had effectively pushed back the encroaching void, creating a persistent, glowing bubble of culture in the heart of an indifferent, frozen wilderness. The world of the prehistoric mind was not a lonely place, but a crowded one, though not by our own kind alone. As we navigated the glacial landscape, we were constantly brushing against the others, creatures of a different lineage, who had walked the earth for hundreds of thousands of years before us. For a long, intense period, humanity was not a single, dominant entity, but a mosaic of distinct human forms. We were the newcomers, the invaders from a warmer clime, meeting these ancient, adapted masters of the Ice Age. Imagine the tension of that first encounter, the silence of two different minds, separated by thousands of years of evolution, meeting across a frozen stream. This was not a war of extermination, but a period of profound, often invisible transformation. We traded, we observed, and in the shadowed silence, we intermingled. These encounters were the genetic crucible of our species. We carry the echoes of that time in our DNA, a hidden legacy of those who were here before us, whose physical forms have vanished, but whose resilience flows in our veins. It was the ultimate test of belonging. To meet another being who is both a mirror and a stranger is the most challenging experience for any intelligence. In those fleeting, silent moments of contact, the future of our species was being negotiated, not through conquest, but through a silent, biological fusion that would forever change the trajectory of what it means to be human. Art is often described as the hallmark of civilization, but its roots reach much deeper into the dark, silent earth of our pre-civilized existence. Long before cities rose or kings reigned, the human spirit demanded expression. When a hand pressed against a cave wall and blew ochre pigment over it, it was not merely an act of decoration. It was an act of claiming existence. By creating an image, our ancestors were declaring, "I am here, and I was witnessed." This was the first attempt to conquer time itself, to carve a piece of one's own consciousness into the unyielding stone. These primitive canvases were the earliest manifestations of the human soul, a desperate, beautiful reach toward the eternal. They captured the animals they feared and hunted, the creatures that walked alongside them in the Great Migration. But they also painted things unseen, symbols, lines, and patterns that hint at a burgeoning inner world, a mind beginning to wonder about the why behind the how. The cave was no longer just a shelter. It became a temple of memory. Every stroke of pigment was a prayer to the unseen forces of the world, an attempt to dialogue with the mystery of life. We often look at these cave paintings as relics of a primitive past, but in truth, they are the first mirrors. They reflect a mind that had transcended the simple, brutal necessity of survival, and had begun, for the very first time, to contemplate its own place in the grand, silent order of the universe. Survival in the unforgiving cradle of the Ice Age was never an individual pursuit. It was the ultimate communal endeavor. We survived not because we were the strongest or the fastest, but because we were the most profoundly social. The law of the ancestors was a silent, unbreakable social contract that governed every facet of existence. It was a hierarchy of experience, where the wisdom of the elders was the tribe's most precious resource. Every member, from the youngest hunter learning the tracks to the oldest keeper of the stories, held a vital role in the intricate web of survival. There were no written laws, yet the rules were absolute. Share the kill, protect the vulnerable, and maintain the unity of the hearth. This social architecture allowed us to transcend the biological limitations of our physical bodies. When the storms raged and the herds vanished, it was the collective intelligence of the tribe that provided the buffer against extinction. We formed deep, enduring emotional attachments that defied the harsh reality of our environment. The law of the ancestors also fostered the first true systems of justice and conflict resolution. Decisions were made in the shared silence of the circle, where consensus was not just a convenience, but a necessity for group cohesion. This was the dawn of altruism, a recognition that the I could only thrive if the we was protected. It was here, in the freezing shadows of our pre-civilized past, that the moral foundations of our modern societies were silently, painstakingly laid. The horizon of human potential began to shift. The endless migration that defined our existence for over 100,000 years started to slow, held back by the discovery of the Earth's hidden secrets. We began to notice the cycle of the seeds, the way a fallen grain could sprout into a life-sustaining plant if left undisturbed in the fertile soil. This was the moment the great transition began, the bridge between the nomadic life of the hunter and the settled life of the farmer. It was not a sudden invention, but a gradual, agonizing shift in consciousness. We were learning to master time itself, moving from being mere participants in the landscape to becoming its architects. As we started to tether ourselves to the land, the hidden code we had carried for millennia began to manifest in new, complex ways. We built the first permanent structures, not just to shelter from the wind, but to store the grain of our labor. The concept of mine and ours shifted, creating the first fractures in the ancient social contract of equality. We were moving from the tribe to the village, from the wanderer to the settler. Yet, in this transition, something of the primordial silence was lost. We traded the freedom of the endless path for the security of the walled perimeter. This was the birth of the complex world, a grand, ambitious, and irreversible leap that would ultimately lead us to the rise of the first empires, forever distancing us from the cold, beautiful, and silent solitude of our prehistoric origins. We stand today at the pinnacle of a world built upon the foundations laid by those who lived in the silence of the Ice Age. We have conquered the elements, mapped the stars, and encoded our thoughts into the infinite reaches of the digital void. Yet, beneath the veneer of modern complexity, the hidden code of our ancestors remains intact. The fear, the love, the need for communal belonging, and the drive to leave a mark upon the world. These are not relics of a primitive past. They are the fundamental architecture of what it means to be human. When we gaze into the darkness of the night, when we seek connection in the digital silence, We are reaching back to the hearth of our beginnings. The forgotten century is not behind us, it is within us. It is the resilience that surfaces in times of crisis, the ancient impulse to create, and the deep-seated yearning for the quiet truth of the natural world. We have traveled far from the caves, but the shadow of the prehistoric mind still follows us, a quiet witness to our relentless ambition. In the end, our journey is not about the conquest of the earth, but about the reclamation of the silence. To understand who we are, we must listen to the echoes of that ancient time. We are the inheritors of the shadow, the keepers of the fire, and the storytellers of a history that began long before the first word was ever written. We are, and have always been, the guardians of the great silence.